As you can see behind me on the screen, my name is James Painter. I'm the director of the journalism program at the Reuters Institute, which is part of Oxford University. You can also see on the screen, so I won't introduce them all with too much detail, who our panelists are. So this is Damien Carrington on my left, followed by Dagmar Damer, and then Andy Revkin at the end. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to give 1 minute of context about the Guardian's divestment campaign. Then each of the panelists are going to talk for about 3, 4, 5 minutes about this topic. Then we're going to have a discussion between us, and then hopefully there'll be lots of time to take as many questions from the floor as possible. However, I must warn you that we have to finish at the very latest by 25 past and be out of the room. So I am going to be fairly brutal to finish punctually. So just by way of introduction, I'm not sure that everybody will know the background to the Guardian divestment campaign. So the context for this was that the Guardian's editor, former editor, Alan Rusbridger, bowed out as editor in May this year after 20 years in the post. And he marked his departure from the Guardian by launching a major campaign to, as he put it, put the threat to earth front and centre in the Guardian's reporting. Now, many people would argue that the Guardian, with its 5 or 6 environment correspondents, already do a very, very good job of that. But he wanted to put even more coverage about the topic within the paper. He argued that climate change was the biggest story that journalism hasn't successfully told, and it was time to dramatically increase, to focus on these key issues and put pressure on actors with power to change the status quo. And again, as many of you might well know, the newspaper announced it would partner with the advocacy organisation 350.org along the grounds of the campaign labelled Keep It in the Ground, which was an advocacy campaign to push major investors, including the Wellcome Trust and the Gates Foundation, to pull their funds out of fossil fuels. Now, in this session, we are going to try not to debate the rights and wrongs of the divestment campaign. We would need an enormous session. For those of you who read Nature and other publications, there's already been a big debate with climate scientists pitching in. We're going to try and focus on whether it is a good or bad thing for journalists to become advocates. I know for those of you who are media academics, this is not a new issue, but it's sort of been re-energized, and it's a vitally important one. In which ways, if any, is that your journalism compromised if you advocate a certain response? And I will just end with a quote from Alan Rusbridger in defense of it. He says, "This is our campaign. It's succeeding pretty well in doing what we intended it to do. Make people sit up, notice, start reading again, and engaging with the issue." So that is the context for this debate. So I'm going to ask Damien to make some introductory comments. I think we should thank all of these journalists who are usually asking the questions and not answering the questions, and it's a different role for them to a certain extent. So Damien, over to you.
Thanks very much, James, and thanks very much to the conference organisers for inviting me here to speak. James gave a very good introduction, so I'll just make a few more remarks. Alan's decision, despite his many great successes to do this campaign, was based on not wanting to have any regrets when he finally stepped down, and he thought that climate change was one of the things that the media has struggled with. So we came up with a campaign. Just as a bit of context, I do want to say that we put more effort into the reporting that went Sorry, I don't think that was me. We put more effort into the reporting that went around the campaign than the campaign itself. It wasn't a replacement for the bread and butter work that we do. We did a whole series of investigations into Shell, BP, Schlumberger and Peabody. We did some amazing multimedia work on carbon bombs in China and Australia and the Arctic. We looked actually at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust in particular, and looked at where they were working, had programs trying to improve people's health in places where companies they were invested in were causing harm through emissions and other ways. So we did a lot of reporting, but why did I feel comfortable taking part in the campaign? I can talk about that. I should say I'm not an official spokesman for The Guardian. Nothing I say is the official Guardian line. If you want that, you can go to the press office. But I was obviously quite heavily involved, and I can tell you why I felt comfortable doing that reporting alongside the campaign. And the first is a UK context. It's absolutely commonplace for UK newspapers to run campaigns. They've gone back a long way. Memorable ones include the Sunday Times, which did a long-running campaign under Harry Evans into the thalidomide scandal, and they've continued right up to today. The most recent one, The Guardian, did was on female genital mutilation, and all the papers do it. So it's not unusual, and it's worth saying that. I did notice actually that the US magazine Nation has started a campaign of sorts, which is to get presidential candidates to pledge not to take campaign funding from fossil fuel companies, which I thought was interesting, as it's probably campaigns are less common in the US. The second reason for feeling comfortable was I think we felt the campaign was rooted in reality. I don't think I need to rehearse what Bill McKibben calls the do the math, the fact that we've got far more carbon locked up in known fossil fuel reserves than we could possibly burn if we want to keep warming to 2 degrees. And when you look at all the fossil fuel companies, they're all exploring for more. So that seems a pretty stark contradiction, and therefore we felt that the campaign was very defendable. Third reason for feeling comfortable was we actually put The Guardian's money where its mouth was. So The Guardian is owned by a charitable trust called the Scott Trust. Over the years, it's built up an endowment which ensures our continuance. It's worth about $1 billion now, and we had to go and make the case to our own money managers that that divestment was a good idea, and they did it, and this is all on the record, and I wrote about it. They made a business decision. They were very clear that it was a business decision that they made to divest, and that's going on now. And then probably the last reason why I felt comfortable with it was that we were open about everything. So one or two of you might have come across the podcast we did. So right from the beginning, right from the very first meetings we had people in the room with microphones recording. Okay, and then every step of the campaign, when we interviewed people, when we went out, we had microphones there all the time. So we didn't do anything secret. There was no kind of discussions behind the scenes. It was all done out in public for everyone to listen to and find out about if they wished to do so. And I think that was a useful part of the campaign in ensuring that we seemed to be doing it in the right way. That's why I felt comfortable about it. What's happened? It's obviously still continuing. I am not aware of any complaints from any readers. They haven't come to me through either directly, which of course is very easy these days on social media, but through the letters editors. I know that Ban Ki-moon phoned up Alan, as did Cristiano Figueres, to commend him on the work that we've been doing. Divestment, of course, and related issues of financial risk has been talked about by the Bank of England and the World Bank. So again, we felt we were in pretty good company there. International reporting of divestment has gone up by about 50%, according to our analysis during the campaign that we've run. And you might have noticed Bill Gates has promised to double his clean tech investments to $2 billion. So in terms of raising the awareness, as James mentioned, Alan had wanted, I think we'd achieved that. We did get one complaint, I should tell you about that, which was essentially a complaint was from ExxonMobil, because we were talking about them quite a lot, as you'd imagine. So we asked them for comment, but they stopped talking to us. So this is what they send us every time. ExxonMobil will not respond to Guardian inquiries because of its lack of objectivity on climate change reporting, demonstrated by its campaign against companies that provide the energy necessary for modern life, including newspapers. So I think being accused of lacking objectivity by a company that funded climate change denial for so long is fairly laughable, and we'll take that one as a badge of honour as well. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Damien. That was very nice and concise and very well argued. Okay, Dagmar, if you'd like to say a few words.
Yes, thank you. I'm working for a daily newspaper in Berlin, der Tagesspiegel, and we have a complete different tradition. Campaigning for journalists and newspapers is seen by the German public as shortly before evil, or probably even worse. We have a press codex. I want to quote you the main words from that to give you an idea. We have to honor the truth, protect human dignity, and provide truthful information to the public. So with that in mind, you can see why no German paper would go into an advocacy campaign on the climate field. The only advocacy campaigns we have sometimes are charitable things, like for poor children or something like that. But you will not find anything else in the German media. And we have a huge problem with our readers, listeners, and viewers who already think that what we are doing is mainly manipulate them and not inform them. On the one hand, we have polls that suggest that most of the asked people think that the classical media provides more truthful information than social media or whatever. It's over 60% who think that. On the other hand, they always think that they are manipulated. And it goes up to, in my private conversations, when somebody asks me, what are you doing for a living? I say I'm a journalist, and then they ask me, oh, can you really write the truth? Or is the American president telling you what to write? And with that mindset, it is probably understandable that no German newspaper would stomach a campaign like that. We probably would be kicked out completely of the market.
Okay, thank you. I will ask Damien to respond to that once we've heard from Andy.
Okay. As Damien said, in journalism, there's a long tradition of what a former editor of the New York Times used to call flooding the zone. Hal Raines, he got fired for other reasons, but he was really good at that. He was good at setting agendas, and I like that in an editor. I hate it. Well, I shouldn't say I hate it, but there are other editors-in-chief of the New York Times in my 15 years on the news staff who things just kind of happened. You didn't have a sense at the beginning of the year you're going somewhere. So it's great to, flooding the zone. We did it, Race in America, Pulitzer Prize was 30 pieces. The Energy Challenge series that I worked on with others in 2006, 2005 and 2006, we got into every facet of the reality that the world does not have the energy menu it needs to thrive, for humans to thrive in this 21st century, partially with global warming. And, but here's the but. And then I moved in 2010 from the news side of the New York Times to the opinion side. I write .earth, which I started as a news blog. It's now in the opinion side of the Times. The way I frame my opinion is that reality matters, which makes me kind of not a really great opinion writer because I write about complexity and risk assessment and that kind of thing. And I've been quiet about the Guardian's approach. We need diversity in media. Experimentation is vital in the media environment we now are in. But I do feel troubled by it. Business model aside, and I don't know the demographics of the readership. I have a feeling that they're liberal on average, but on the website, which is a global thing, so that may be different. So preaching to the converted is a way to draw sustained traffic to a place. .earth is kind of, because it's nuanced, doesn't get a lot of traffic. Now, so here's some specifics, a few things. One thing that worries me about choosing a particular agenda as a news imperative, as opposed to saying global warming is important as a news imperative, is that you wall off other things you might want to write about. That I came late to economics. I learned about opportunity cost. Everything you're doing means you're not doing something else. So what are you not covering when you're putting your resources into covering one thing? And if that one aspect of the climate thing is divestment and finger-pointing approach to the problem, and not looking at the full suite of ways that societies are going to need to explore to decarbonize a growing and complicated global economy, you're kind of missing stuff. And journalism, ideally, to me, is about making sure you're keeping track of the whole picture and in context with history. One of the things that environmentalists and environmentalist media got into the trap around in the late sort of 2005 through the failure of Copenhagen was not to talk about the other energy challenge the world faces. That we don't have enough energy choices. 40% of the world doesn't have a place to plug in. When India had their blackout, 300 million people didn't know it because they don't have electricity. So you know, that's a part of our energy challenge as much as dealing with the risk of reducing the risk of climate change. So again, if you choose an agenda, how does that relate to what you're covering and not covering? And how does that relate to your feeling of comfort with your responsibility as a journalistic enterprise? Here's a couple of quick things too. Divestment, to me, and I've talked about this, it's a great conversation to have. On campuses, it's a vital conversation to have about what is our endowment. I made this point on a panel with Bill McKibben a few years ago at Harvard, where I said, to me, the greatest value in examining the divestment question is what is our endowment and what is fiduciary responsibility? That's what boards at universities or corporations or nonprofits have to do, maximize the return on their money. So that's the thing, so it's a reporting opportunity. Another reporting question is, with divestment, where do you stop? Is it just the extractors of fossil fuels, or is it the J.P. Morgans and Barclay Banks that are lending the money for companies to extract more fossil fuels? Do you cut them off too? Where do you stop? Car companies, and that to me is a reporting opportunity more than an agenda, and it's a good one. Then there's the fundamental divest-invest debate, which this is Dennis Hayes, one of the founders of Earth Day, is against divestment. And again, I'm in this sort of, I see merits and challenges everywhere. But Dennis Hayes feels that investing is the way to go. If you're a young person and you want to go to business school and get into a company and torque it to being more of a Unilever, perhaps, and less of a Monsanto, then that is a good choice of a life. Should that person be denigrated because he or she is not, running a divestment program at a university? And then just getting back to the truncation issue, I've met young nuclear entrepreneurs. That when I was a kid, learning about the history of the nuclear industry, it was people like Hyman Rickover. It was the military-industrial complex. But now the people who are innovators in nuclear energy are 28-year-old PhDs from MIT. And why would I not want to write about them too in pursuing a better energy menu for the long haul? The last thing, and again, the biggest issue to me is this issue of story choices. I did a little bit of sifting. In the New York Times, we make mistakes and we don't cover everything either. And I'm always running up a down escalator and it's accelerating and there are people with fire hoses directed at me. So some of the things I'm going to mention here, I have not written about. I've probably tweeted about them all. The Guardian, as far as I know, hasn't written anything lately about the future of nuclear power in a world with climate constraints, except for a story in March quoting a scientist and this is a good story. It was a really good story about China. It appears to be pushing much harder on deploying nuclear than it is on making sure it's safe. Really important story. The headline was something about China's insane. The word insane was in there. Was a quote from a scientist. And I think we really do we're obligated to think, whatever you think about existing nuclear power plants, if you're not thinking about the next generation, then that's a missed opportunity. There was a letter from 66 conservation biologists supporting nuclear power as a conservation strategy in the 21st century because of its potential to limit carbon dioxide emissions. Tom Lovejoy was on the list. I don't think that letter was covered. And you guys, you've got all these resources, so that struck me as that's very newsworthy. And the New York Times didn't cover it either, the news side of the paper. So that worries me. And there are other examples like that. The Financial Times wrote about a letter from E.O. Wilson, one of the great biologists and writers of our time, and Dan Cameron, who's here at the meeting, and others, criticizing Britain for meeting its targets for renewables by importing American forests. Essentially, we have this boom in southeastern forests going in pellets to British power plants, and that's seen as a climate win when the climate math isn't there. I don't think you've covered that. So anyway, that's enough.
Okay, so that's a lot of points already being raised criticising The Guardian for this campaign and the impact on journalism. If I could just go through them, Damien, very quickly. As I understand it, Dagmar, your point is that if you adopt an agenda and you adopt a campaign, there's a great danger that the very low levels of trust, at least in the UK, that journalists have becomes even lower because you're not aiming for the truth, you're driven to a certain extent by your agenda. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
At least in Germany.
At least in Germany. Okay. Damien, do you want to have a go at that one? Is it okay because in the UK, as you say, there's much more history of campaigning journalism, or do you worry that you're going to lose the trust of your readers by following an agenda?
It's difficult to measure the trust of the readers, right? But I think, if anything, in terms of the responses we've had, we've increased the trust we have with our readers because they agree with us that we've put a lot of effort into something which is very important,
So would you say that it's okay for The Guardian because it's aiming for a very specific sector of people who are already very committed to this issue? It's very closely linked to a sort of, in part, a sort of NGO vision of what's important. So you don't actually lose that much trust or readers because you're already preaching to the converted. Is that a fair summary, or is that unfair?
Yeah, no, I don't accept that. The Guardian has about 140 million unique browsers a month all around the world. We're not a niche publication. We're the second most read English quality paper in the world online. So by no means are we a niche. I mean, our target, if it's anything, is what we call progressives, liberals, and they often make up half of the population. I think in terms of say taking on campaigns in the UK, for people who don't know, like every newspaper will back a political party when a general election comes along. But people don't then distrust those papers to report accurately on a whole suite of other things. I think one of the things which helps kind of keep the trust in The Guardian is we're not owned by anybody. We're owned by a charitable trust. Nobody tells us what to write.
Okay, and the other, Andy made several points, but one of the key ones is it sort of delimits your story choices, or there's a danger that it might restrict your story choices and what you cover if you're seeing it too much through this prism of the divestment campaign. Do you accept that or not?
Yes and no, right? So we wrote a lot more about divestment than we would have done if we hadn't had the campaign. Okay, that's fair enough. But then there were some pretty interesting things happening, like the world's biggest sovereign wealth fund, Norway's so-called oil fund, divesting out of many coal companies. But on more generally, it was actually the complete opposite. Because this was a major focus for The Guardian, we probably increased the size of the team 4 times. We wrote to investigative journalists, we wrote to data journalists, we wrote to foreign correspondents all around the world. We have far more resource. I mean, The Guardian already has, I think, the biggest environmental reporting team of any media organisation I know, and we increased that by about 4 times. So I wouldn't accept for a moment that we limited the choices. We went after a whole bunch of stuff that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
And finally, before I open it up, I'm sorry I haven't taken all your points, Andy, but this issue, okay, I know there's a lot of debate about how far you take divestment, what's the best option. You've opted for a particular interpretation of that divestment campaign. Is that a problem or not really?
What do you mean by particular interpretation?
Well, Andy, do you want to, you were saying that there's lots of different options. Where do you stop on the divestment?
Do you mean divest, invest?
Well, the part he's talking about is where I said, do you divest in the banks as well? the people
Oh, I
financing, and go down the list. Where do you stop?
Yeah, fine. Well, I mean, I completely agree with you, Andy, that it's a really good conversation to have, right? But for almost all the people involved in divestment, they've chosen the top 100 coal companies and the top 100 oil and gas companies as ranked by the carbon in their reserves. And I agree, you could go beyond that. You could have a really good conversation. I mean, I think the invest side of it is actually really important, and we did have a big conversation about that, which, again, you can hear on the podcast. I think we just felt it was a bit complicated. I mean, divestment's a little bit tricky to explain in in a very short space of time. So to then have divest, invest, that was kind of probably a bit too much for a media message.
And just to be clear, because many people won't know this, I think I'm right in saying that you've actually given space to people who don't necessarily agree with the divestment campaign within your newspaper and on your online site. Is that right?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I haven't counted them. I think we've probably had at least 5 different op-eds or articles saying that divestment's a bad idea. The Guardian kind of infuriates people sometimes because we seem to be rather inconsistent. We like to think of it as being a broad church.
Okay, so thanks very, very much indeed. That leaves about 25 minutes. I'm going to try and take as many questions as possible. So can I beg you to keep your comments or questions as short as possible? If you don't, I'm afraid I'm going to be rude and interrupt you. But I would like to take as many views, particularly from journalists and scientists from other countries, to get a sort of international perspective. And I think probably what we're going to do, because so many people want to make comments, is take 3 at a time, if that's okay. So please make a note. And please identify very briefly who you are. So the guy in the green shirt. But do remember to press your microphone. And keep it short, please.
Thank you. Adam Pavlov, University of Natural Resources in Vienna, and also Greenpeace in Central and Eastern Europe. I wanted to touch upon this issue of the question of truth and what is truth. And I would say that the truth is, and I think that's clear to everyone in the room, is that climate change is the biggest challenge in human history, and sort of also tying into this question of how normative can science be. I think it was Hansen or Mann who have said, as a climate scientist, we need to do everything in our power to raise awareness. In awareness of that truth, don't we have a certain obligation to really kind of push this agenda, let's say? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lots of other questions. The guy in the blue shirt, yep.
Dan Kamen, University of California, Berkeley. Except for people in this room, I wanted to go back to Andy's point about how critical the dialogue on divestment, wherever you come down on this, are. And as a university professor, I have yet to meet kind of a reasonably educated person under 30 who thinks divestment shouldn't be at the center of the conversation. I kind of wonder, are we really talking about a generational issue much more than, what are the ins and outs of a specific pro-investment campaign or some other effort like that? So I'd love to get the
comments great.
On that.
That's a great short question. And yes, you have there.
Hi, Oumia Ahmed Mekidash, Le Point Afrique. I would like to know if you do involve African journalists, and if yes, how?
Sorry, we
involved?
Have you involved African journalists?
Yes.
Okay. And if so, how? Okay, can we take the truth one first then? Does anybody want to have a go at that, Andy, briefly?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the scientist as advocate as well. On .earth, I've written quite a bit about how scientists absolutely have the responsibility to act as a concerned citizen. My suggestion to them, and this relates to the newsroom division, is that you compartmentalize your message into 2 sentences. I'm a climate scientist. I study sea ice, period. I'm a parent and a voter, and I'm really concerned about global warming, period. And we all are a person and a professional at the same time. And if you want to maintain the authority in your science and also express yourself as a citizen, you can do it, and you should. Jim Hansen, I've never criticized for what, how he approaches things. Susan Solomon took a very different approach in 2007 at the IPCC meeting, where she said, it's not my job to tell you to be worried. She said, here's the data. And then she kind of did this. So the variegation, I think, is appropriate. But what I just mentioned about this sort of demarcation between the professional, the scientist, the journalist, and the personal, the passion, the agenda, is an important part of maintaining authority and also getting a message out.
Okay, Dagmar, did you want to come in on that one, on truth?
I always have debates about the question how far a journalist herself or himself can engage in a position. And my answer normally is, of course, I will not produce objective truths to you, because I have a context, and of course I have views, and these views, of course, will come into my reporting, because that is how I find my topics, that is how I find the stories. But what I always will do is I will report that as fair as possible. And that is the only thing I can add to the truth question.
Okay. Do you want to have a go at truth, or do you want to have a go at any of the other questions, Damien?
Yeah. So, I mean, as Dagmar's kind of mentioned there, as journalists, I did a small amount of science. I did a PhD and postdoc, and I can sort of see the parallels. You know, in science, you're trying to understand the natural world to the best approximation you can, and we're trying to deliver the best approximation of the truth that we can in the time we have available. I think, you know, in the context of this discussion, in terms of advocacy, I think there's actually a phrase you used, Andy, which is you're an advocate for reality, and I think that's, you know, really where we're sort of coming from. You know, when you go to, as I did in last year, to the IPCC synthesis report, it's there, right? It's reality, and there are plenty of newspapers that aren't reporting that. So I think, you know, we felt pretty comfortable doing that. I mean, whilst I've got the mic, then let me take these.
A generational issue.
Yeah, it's certainly. I mean, the thing about divestment which is sometimes lost, I think, is that it is a political campaign, right? It's not a financial campaign. You're not going to bankrupt these companies. It's a political campaign. It's about stigmatising those companies. And I think that it really has appealed on campuses. That's certainly where it's begun. It's really filtering through into the financial world now, because people are going to money managers and saying, I want you to give us products that can do this. The work that the Carbon Tracker Group have done has been really, really powerful. But I think it's definitely, I agree on that point. And then on African journalists, I mean, we certainly did some reporting from Africa. Our correspondent down there, called David Smith, did quite a lot for us. We have an African network of journalists, and we also have a number of bloggers who work for The Guardian. They weren't as closely involved in this, perhaps, as they should have been, though.
Okay, Andy or Dama, do you have an issue around the generational issue? Is that your experience in the US? Andy, that's very much something that young people care about more than older people.
Well, again, I'll just get back to what I said. I think Dan agrees that I think it's vital for young people to get in the face of the graybeards and the gray suits and say, hey, it's our climate that you're messing with, essentially. This happened in 2005 at the Montreal Climate Talks, when I met Billy Parrish, a young activist, barefoot guy, you know, in the hallway, walking the halls. And that's an important thing to do. But then he evolved into, now he runs a solar financing startup in California. He's stopped that part, and he's actually starting to try to address the problem through solar entrepreneurship. And that, I think, just gets at the very, you know, having variegation is your friend in this arena.
Okay, great. I'm going to take 3 more questions. I'm going to do this side and then the next side that time. So in the white shirt there.
Hi there, Martin Seagate, Imperial College London. Damien, you made some very good examples of how advocacy in journalism works with FGM and thalidomide. But I can see with all those 2 examples that they have an obvious endpoint when you have a policy that's created and things change. I'm wondering what the endpoint for this campaign is going to be. Is it spelt out?
Okay, great. Sorry, the guy in the blue jacket. Yep.
I'm Kian Minswu. I'm a PhD student at the University of Graz in Austria. My question is primarily for Dagmar, if I may. So the view you were expressing about the German public seemed quite strong to me. I was wondering if identifying roles would change things. So do you think the German public would be more comfortable if you said, as a journalist, I believe this, as a mother or a teacher or a public citizen, I believe these things, and separated that? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, one more from this side. Okay, yes, sorry, the woman in the glasses. Yep, you. Yep. Yes, you.
Thank you. Vanna Walkley, the Malta Business Weekly. Could you identify newspapers who are taking an opposite tack and supporting the fossil fuel industry, which presumably is developing a rather interesting counter-strategy? And do you have any news on that?
Okay. Thank you. So we'll take the first question, Damien. How do you judge success of this campaign? I think was broadly the issue.
So the campaign narrowly had a very precise goal, which was we asked the world's two biggest health charities, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust, to divest considerable investments. They haven't done so yet, but we live in hope, so that will be the clear endpoint. As James quoted Alan Rusbridger saying at the beginning, part of it was about the conversation, and we know that the divestment conversation has certainly taken off, so that's been a success in its own right.
I think Alan Rusbridger has also said the golden rule for newspapers or media organisations is don't start a campaign unless you can be sure you're going to win. So, how are you going to, if you don't get Gates or Wellcome to disinvest, have you got other metrics to portray it as a success?
We're not giving up yet.
Okay, Dagmar, you had the second question, I think. Can you make a distinction? I, as a journalist, think that, but I, as a mother, whatever, think differently.
Probably I could not do that. Because as a journalist, I only have one public face, and that is my journalist's public face. So it's not possible to do these distinctions. But maybe I give some more background why that trust crisis is going on. And that has a lot to do with the crisis in Ukraine and the reporting about it. We have, that goes back to the peace movement of the 80s. A strong public feeling that it would be important to engage more with Russia and not to make a clear distinction who started the whole thing. Our readers do not like that. And that is a strong sentiment. And that is one of the main reasons why we now have that trust crisis. Because people think we are taking the side of Ukraine. Even if we only report what is going on. That already is more than our readers want to digest. And of course we became much more critical in the times or in the time of social media, in which they have so many groups in which they only get their own opinion reflected. And they are not really in the mood, many of them are not really in the mood to have other opinions on the table anymore. So the whole public debate is changing. And that is the context for that trust crisis.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question is, are there newspapers that are taking an opposite tack, as it were? And how are they doing, I think was the question, or how powerful is they? Do you want to answer that, Damien, in the UK context, and maybe Andy briefly in the US context? As brief as you can. Sorry to be insistent.
Yeah, in the UK there's a group of some of the newspapers that people would identify as being, right-wing newspapers have frequently questioned climate change as a problem at all, and certainly been very down on divestment. The Wall Street Journal in the US are other examples as well. So Australia, again, those three countries, as James will tell you, are quite strong in terms of climate scepticism. So there are certainly newspapers that reflect those people's views.
I think, just an aside, if I could abuse my position, one of the features of the UK press is that the coverage of climate change in general is becoming more and more polarised along political lines. And I'm afraid that I don't think that's healthy, but it's certainly true. Andy, US coverage?
Well, in the U.S., it is still mostly constrained to the editorial pages. The Wall Street Journal, of course, is the number one source of contrary assertions, but it's really constrained to their editorial page. It hasn't leaked into their news side. They did a lot of good climate reporting, including on the climate treaty process. So there were some really good reporters there over the years. I just tweeted, by the way, using the meeting hashtag, a piece I did a few years ago called "Passion and Detachment in Journalism." That's very relevant. Just go into the Twitter stream and you'll find it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take 3 questions from over here. Yes. The person behind you.
Thank you very much. My name is Park Mbozia. I'm a research fellow at the University of Zambia. And I'm a journalistically trained guy, and I've been working for the last 15 years with journalists, supporting them in different ways, including bringing them to conferences like this one. Now, I think on the topic, obviously I want to comment about the Guardian's campaign, but generally the campaigns, the question is there room for advocacy journalism, or crusade journalism, as you call it, in environment and climate change? The answer is yes. There are a lot of issues. I mean, governance issues and so on, whether it's inequitable distribution of resources from extractive industries and so on. Then the second question that you were confronted with by younger journalists is, how can I get it right? And my answer is always, you go back to the principles of journalism, I mean, which were taught in the school. Ethical conduct, fairness, truthfulness, and so on. And I think with those principles, a journalist is armed to undertake crusade journalism, provided they remain ethical, So I think we should not shy away from it. And also, I think one of the important things is to carry the citizens along, the public along. So I think the issue must be of public interest. And if it is, then you'll have the public on your side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you were keen to have a question.
Emily Cox, University of Sussex in the UK. First of all, I've been an environmental activist for many, many years, and to me one of the core tenets of activism is bearing witness, and so I think that saying that journalism can't be activism is completely irrelevant. I think journalism by its very nature is activism. But on that ground, one of the main things that journalists have to do is to bear witness to injustices. So my question for Damien is, on this topic of kind of preaching to the converted, are you not concerned that by concentrating so much on a divestment campaign, all you're doing is simply telling a lot of people things that they already know, and actually not putting that message out to some of the maybe not quite so affluent, upper middle class liberal readers that actually need to hear this message?
I've answered that question, but I'll answer him again. Okay, and I think there was one over there, yes.
Heike Schroeder, I'm University of East Anglia. So I understand the endeavour to speak truth, but what about the endeavour to provide a variety of perspectives, diversity of perspectives in journalism? Not just, across different types of journalistic outputs, but actually in each and every one of them.
Okay, so it's the role of journalism to provide a variety of perspectives. Damien, you said yourself that you have no access to Exxon. Do you think by doing this campaign you are delimiting your variety of opinion and sources?
No, and I'll give you a good example, which is that Shell is one of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world. And I know our energy editor was concerned that when we did the divestment campaign, they'd stop talking to him, they'd kind of not want to answer his calls, it would be more difficult to get the information we needed. We had precisely the opposite. He came, this is a man who runs one of the biggest companies in the world, he came and sat in our office for an hour and a quarter on the record. Because they were concerned, I guess, they didn't put it that way, but they were really enlivened, shall we say. They were invigorated by our coverage, and if anything, it's apart with the exception of Exxon, I think it's helped us get better access.
And it's a sort of similar question that you had before, but are you just preaching to the converted by this campaign?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly, there's just kind of a core Guardian reader of stereotype,
Did you say cool?
No, core.
Oh, core, sorry.
I think they're cool, but that's
sorry, I thought
that's a matter of opinion. In the UK, it's the kind of muesli-eating, sandal-wearing Guardianista, right? That's the stereotype. That comes completely out of the newspaper. Online, where people are far younger, more than, I think it's 2/3 of our traffic is now overseas, they don't have any of those stereotypes connected with The Guardian. What they see is a liberal newspaper which pays more attention to the environment than anybody else.
Okay, I'm going to move rapidly on. Yes, the guy in the blue shirt, yeah.
Yes, thank you. My name is Raj Shinde. I'm from Media India Group, obviously from India. Just want to give a feedback that having a passionate campaign among the media and the various newspapers is very common in India, particularly after the disaster takes place for funding, as well as campaigns like Save the Tiger, campaigns like biodiversity conservation. So that's quite common. As regards this particular campaign, there are a couple of views that we have heard in India. Number one is, people already knew that we need to de-emphasize fossil fuel. So why the Guardian is initiating it now? And those who know about it probably think that seems to be a very convenient campaign, because as such, the economy in developed countries is not accelerating. So divestment seems to be the right way to go. That is number one. Number two is some people are very happy because this particular divestment probably will help in attracting investment in developing countries. So probably it's a good thing to do. But then there is no particular things that divested amount or the divested investment would necessarily go in a right way in other countries. Because after all, every investment owner needs a profit.
As quick as you can, because you've got it. Yeah. So your question, can you just quickly summarize what your question is?
Two parts. One is why the Guardian is thinking about divestment campaign now, whereas the problem is there around for more than 2 decades. That's number one. And number two is whether Guardian is aware that divested amount would go in the right place in really non-fossil fuel kind of things.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yes, at the front here, and then behind. Yep.
Hi.
Quick, keep them short, please.
My name is Ames Musal. I'm from Nepal. I work for the Third Pole. I'm a journalist. My short question is, how long will this campaign go, and then what is the next issue for Guardian to do advocacy then?
Okay, and yes, you behind.
This is Fabiola Martin, University of York. I'm a sciences lecturer and a doctor, and I just want to comment on the fact that The Guardian has also a mandate for education, and it has educated the population of UK, including myself, on what funding bodies such as Wellcome Trust, who say that they are spending money to improve the health of the humanity worldwide, do. And to be honest with you, I wasn't aware how much they were spending in taking the coal and carbon out of Earth, which is supposed to stay in. So I applaud you on your campaign. I don't care what the outcome is. But having read Wellcome Trust's response was enough for me to make me think about, do I want to apply to this funding body in future, as much as I consider which coffee I buy and if it's fair trade or not.
Thank you very much for that comment. I'm sorry they're all to you, and they're more about the campaign than journalism. So briefly, Damien, because I want to take another couple of rounds.
Okay, so thank you. Yes, so the first gentleman from India was saying, why do we do it now? Aren't we 20 years too late? Well, I don't think we're the only people who are 20 years too late, and maybe better late than never. I mean, you're right. You know, what I disagree about with perhaps is that we're telling people stuff they already know. I think, there's a huge swathe of people, and actually Naomi Klein's book's really good on this. She kind of explains how she just ignored climate change. It looked too difficult, too horrible, too far away for a long time, despite being, an educated, smart person. And until someone really stuck it in her face, she kind of ignored it, and that's what we try to do. We try to really force it in people's face. Of course, we can't control or know where divested money gets reinvested, but that's, as I say, not the point of the campaign. It's a political campaign. I think did somebody ask how long?
Yeah, what next? I think
how long. What next? Is, I'm afraid it's watch this space. We have a new editor now, so we're taking stock and seeing what the brilliant Kath Viner wants to do with the Guardian next, and I'm sure you'll know about that before too long. And then finally, just I completely agree with the woman's point, naturally, that Wellcome Trust, it's very odd. That,
is the new editor as committed as Alan Rusbridge?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, to green issues, Kath is extremely green. She's worked with Guardian for a long time, but she launched Guardian Australia and then went to run Guardian America, so she's seen the sort of state of the debate in all those different places and is really keen to take that on.
Okay, I'm going to take one last round. I haven't had many questions from the back, so the guy in the grey shirt, and then I'm going to come down here.
Yes, thanks. My name is Richard Heady. I'm part of the Climate Accountability Institute. The Guardian covered my work a year and a half ago on the 90 largest carbon majors and their historic contribution to climate change. My question is, are you covering investment by oil and gas companies in low and zero carbon fuels? And the second part is, are you covering the state-owned oil companies that would step into the breach if investor-owned oil companies abandon their reserves?
It's another question about the campaign rather than journalism, but you've got 10 seconds. Sorry, I think you've been asking. Preferably about journalism, if we can.
It is. Michael LePage, New Scientist magazine. My question is to the panel, do you think that hidden advocacy is a much greater threat than open advocacy? I'm thinking of, for instance, of News Corporation and its coverage of climate science.
Okay, and one last question. I think the guy in the white shirt, you were keen? We can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Peter Frumhoff, Union of Concerned Scientists. It was basically about the question of self-advocacy. I really appreciate The Guardian's transparency, but as readers of various news sources, it's much harder to discern when journalists, or scientists for that matter, are advocating without being transparent about it. I wonder if you had any recommendations, any of you on the panel, for being watchful and distinguishing good journalism from stealth advocacy in journalism as a challenge.
Thank you very much. So I'm afraid that's going to be the last round. But so, Damien, if you want to come in, answer those questions, and any very quick final comments, that would be very helpful.
Sure. So on the question of hidden advocacy, I'm sure many people would agree that lots of newspapers, different media groups have their own campaigns, whether they're open or not. They back certain causes. We try to be really open, as I say. We recorded on microphone pretty much everything that we did, so we couldn't have been much more open about that.
Okay, Andy, some last thoughts.
Well, you raised that this stealth advocacy thing goes way beyond journalism. It's about how to know what's real in a world, especially at the web, TMI, too much information, and all kinds of hidden agendas, marketing included, not just, contrarian stuff. And this gets to the vital importance of us working on the education system to incorporate news literacy, web literacy, as something we teach our kids from early on. Yeah. Stony Brook University, news literacy, they have a whole thing on it.
Okay, great. Dagmar, any last thought?
I have it easy to answer that one because in my paper, it's a liberal paper. We have points of views that are from here to here. So they let me write that climate change is a real issue. And in fact, right now, nobody anymore writes it's no problem. But we have people from the right wing of the political field to the left wing of the political field. And everybody is allowed to write his or her opinions. And that is what our readers obviously like.
Okay, just before we say thank you to the panel, just as a matter of interest, a show of hands, how many, having heard that debate, feel strongly that The Guardian are helping by conducting this campaign? How many are actually in favour of what The Guardian are doing? Wow. How many are not in favour? My gosh. And how many don't really know? Damien, I think you've got a resounding yes vote there. Not about journalism, but about the campaign. So can we thank the panelists very, very much?